Chair Rocha, you can go ahead and start. We are live.
Right. I call to order this meeting of the Audit and Compliance Committee of the University of Minnesota Board of Regents. Good morning, everyone. Thank you to those who are joining us via the live stream video. First, I'd like to welcome our student representatives. We've got Paul Koch and Riel Pertu Swanson. Thank you both for being here. Before we jump into our agenda today, I'd like to first offer congratulations to Chief Auditor Gail Klatt, who earlier this week announced her plans to retire this fall. Gail has served the university in the Chief Auditor role for nearly 3 decades, and I think we can all agree that the university has been extremely well served by her leadership of our internal audit function. Thank you, Gail, for your steadfast service to the university, and we will certainly have other opportunities to wax eloquently about the service that you've provided. So let's turn to our first item of business. The first item on our agenda is the review of the external auditor relationship and services provided. This is a discussion item. We have about 15 minutes. Controller Sue Paulson will join us for the review of the external auditor relationship and those services. Controller Paulson, welcome. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair Rocha, committee members. I'll work from the actual report included in your docket materials, and I ask that you refer to the report titled External Auditor Review and Summary of Auditor Relationships and Services provided on page 4 of the docket materials. This report covers the 4th year of a 4-year contract with Deloitte. Just a friendly reminder that last spring, we did seek and obtain this committee's approval to exercise a 3-year contract extension, which translates to Deloitte being the university's external audit firm through the audit cycle for fiscal year 2023. The services provided during this engagement and the report in front of you include the audit of the consolidated financial statements for both the University of Minnesota and Raminco, 2 compliance audits, the single audit, and the Minnesota Office of Higher Education audit for all the campuses, and the NCAA agreed upon procedures for Twin Cities and Crookston. Just a friendly reminder related to the NCAA procedures for Twin Cities, those are conducted every year. And for Crookston and Duluth, those are conducted once every 3 years. In terms of quality, the services performed were as agreed upon by Deloitte, and the team did an excellent job in providing those services. The lead audit engagement partner and team were accessible, and they devoted the right amount of time to all the different engagements. They discussed the respective audit plans and related risks with university management, and they met the agreed upon performance criteria. In addition, they provided and received feedback related to opportunities for improvement for all of the engagements going forward. As I shared with this committee back in February, for both the Deloitte and the university teams, all the work related to all of these engagements was completed virtually. In terms of fees, the fees were less than quoted and budgeted by just under $9,000 for the FY20 engagements and $21,000 more than the prior year, primarily due to the prior year engagement, including agreed upon procedures for only Twin Cities campus, and then the negotiated increase in fees for the annual financial statement and compliance audits. Deloitte also performed other audit and audit-like services. We engaged them for 2 other reasons. One was routine consent procedures related to bond offerings, and then the agreed upon procedures related to the university's Academic Health Center and Mayo Partnership Regenerative Medicine Award from the state of Minnesota, and the university's compliance with the laws of Minnesota related to those expenditures. The services for both of those engagements were as agreed upon, and the Deloitte team did an excellent job in providing those services. The overall, the fees for the additional services were as quoted, and $11,000 more than the prior year, primarily due to the type of engagements, and then the agreed upon procedures related to those engagements. The university did enter into 4 engagements with 4 other audit firms during for the FY20 audit cycle. Unless noted, all of those engagement letters were reviewed by the Controller's Office, and we concluded that none of these engagements resulted in impairment of independence and factor appearance for any of the firms that we engaged. In quick summary, Clifton Larson Allen was engaged by the Center for Farm Management to assess the readiness for a SOC 2 examination for their FinPac system. Ernst & Young was engaged by the Tax Management Office to provide a review and recommendations for taxes related to a joint degree program with the university in China. Estabrook Scott et al. Was engaged by KUMD, the radio station on the Duluth campus, to perform attestation services as a recipient of federal funds. And KPMG was engaged by the Office of General Counsel to conduct a review of issues related to the human resources function at the University of Minnesota. In summary, all of the audit and audit-like services totaled $813,666 in terms of fees for the fiscal year 20 engagements, which was up about a little over $107,000 from the prior year, really just due to the number of additional engagements for the year over year. I also wanted to take just a couple of minutes to provide an update related to the Deloitte partner rotation. If you recall, the current partner assigned to the University of Minnesota engagement, Katie Knutson, will roll off our engagement. Deloitte has a firm-wide policy that allows a partner to serve a specific client for up to 10 years and requires a rotation after 10 years. And Katie has met that 10-year limitation. AVP Volna had a conversation with the Deloitte leadership here in the Twin Cities, and the plan is for the Deloitte to put forth 2 potential candidates as partners to serve the university. The candidates will interview with both the senior leaders involved in the audits and the audit and the chair and the vice chair of the audit and compliance committee. We do anticipate those interviews to take place over the next couple of months. And this plan ensures we have a new Deloitte partner in place for the fiscal 21 audit cycle. And with that, Chair Rocha, that ends the summary, and I stand for any questions that you or the committee members may have.
Thank you for that report. Any comments or questions from committee members? Please use the raise hand feature, or Ms. Flotten will let me know that that somebody has any questions. Ms. Flotten, do we have anybody?
I don't see anybody. Looks like Regent Powell.
I will turn it over to Regent Powell. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair Rocha. Just a quick one. Well, first of all, thanks to the audit team for very good performance. We appreciate it, and their continuous work for us. One detailed question on KUMD. Just remind us that property has now been sold. Do I remember correctly? And so this would have been sort of the final audit for that unit.
Ms. Paulson.
Chair Rocha, Regent Powell, the KUMD radio station sale is still pending. We are still in the process of final due diligence. So we will have to do one more year, at least one more year, for the attestation services for receipt of federal funds, because we own the radio station in fiscal 21. And that's the update I have related to KUMD. We are in the final stages of the due diligence period.
Okay, thank you.
Regent Powell, any further questions?
No.
All right. Any other questions? All right. Hearing none, we'll move on to item number 2. This is the update on access management audit findings and recommendations. This is also a discussion item. We have about 25 minutes. Will take us through the update. We have with us Vice President Bernie Galachik, Nathan Kuffner, Senior Director for Identity and Access Management for OIT, and Quinn Galswick from Internal Audit. Gentlemen, please begin at your convenience here.
Thank you, Chair Rocha, members of the committee. As stated, my name is Quinn Galswick, and I'm the university's audit manager for IT. And I am joined today by both Bernie and Nathan Kuffner. This presentation is primarily for Bernie and Nathan to have an opportunity to update you on remediation efforts taken to date on the June 2020 Identity and Access Management Collaborative Assessment. As a reminder, by identity and access management, we mean the processes for confirming who users are and managing their access to university systems, or more simply, the right access for the right person at the right time. Prior to turning it over to Bernie and Nathan, I want to provide you a brief reminder on what the collaborative assessment approach is and a summary of the scope and results of the Identity and Access Management Review. After the presentation, there will be plenty of time for any questions you may have. Next slide, please. So to begin with, a refresher on collaborative assessments. The collaborative assessment is a new process audit approach where internal audit and management already agree there's a high level of risk, so it does not make sense to do the same sort of detailed process walkthroughs and testing we would normally do to identify risks and controls. Instead, we focus our time on working jointly with management to confirm observations, assess overall risk associated with processes, and develop a mitigation strategy. IAM was the first engagement we piloted this approach on, and at the June 2020 committee meeting, when we presented it, the committee agreed due to the breadth and complexity of the issues identified in the report, along with the extended timeline for remediation, that the follow-up would be handled through periodic updates instead of our normal follow-up process. This presentation and the accompanying docket material, along with the similar written management updates that were provided to the committee at the September and February meetings, are being done in alignment with that commitment. In addition to these management updates, internal audit also plans to conduct an assessment of implementing controls in the next fiscal year. At the end of the presentation, during the question period, we're open to any feedback you may have for changes to this follow-up approach in the future. Next slide, please. As you've all received a copy of this report, and as we already discussed it last June, I'm not going into all the details of our scope and results. But just as a brief reminder, our assessment reviewed identity and access management processes throughout the university, with a particular focus on the management of user access. We used the collaborative assessment approach, as from previous audit work, we already knew there was a high level of risk associated with identity and access management. And we also recognized the broad nature of these processes at the university, which we broke into 25 separate components for our review. These processes and their risks not only span multiple central and non-central IT units, but are also interconnected with processes and data managed by non-IT groups, such as human resources and academic units. In our collaborative assessment, we concluded with management that 16 of the 25 components we reviewed had a high level of residual risk. Mr. Kuffner will provide information later in this presentation on specific steps taken to address some of these risks to date. However, first, Mr. Chair, I'd like to now turn it over to Mr. Glodchuk to discuss overall mitigation strategy and its associated timelines.
Vice President Glodchuk, the floor is yours.
Next slide.
Thank you, Mr. Galswick. Good morning, Chair Rocha, members of the committee. As a brief reminder to the committee, the goal for this program, as you've seen in your docket materials, is to ensure that the right person has the right access at the right time to technology services and systems. There are 3 bodies of work that need to occur in the next 2 to 4 years to achieve this outcome. Service level decisions need to be made that include the reevaluation of services and to whom they are provided, ultimately enabling us to understand if services should solely be provided as a condition of enrollment or employment. Process improvement needs to occur, where outcomes include consistent data, timely transactions, and improved service delivery. Identity and access management activities are triggered by upstream transactional data entry events that are part of several institutional processes. The consistency of these transactions are crucial and enable automation. Technology acquisition and implementation will support this program and the continuing identity and access management operations. These acquisitions and the rationalization of previously used technologies are providing a means for us to automate those tasks that were previously manually performed. Next slide, please. As I hand this presentation to Nathan Kuffner, the University Senior Director for Identity and Access Management, I want to remind this committee that this is a multi-year effort that is cross-functional, involving multiple management functions and the modernization of several business processes across the institution. This timeline represents the order in which this program's work was to be sequenced, the length of the COVID-19 pandemic, and the reaction that was needed by human resources, student administration, and technologists forced the program to creatively reorder the activities that appear on this timeline. For example, the program responded to the conditions of the pandemic by first focusing its energy on technology acquisition and implementation, rather than first assessing service level decisions, and re-architecting business processes. The components that appear on this timeline are currently being resequenced, and an adjusted program timeline will be presented to you as part of our next update. Done well, committee members, these efforts will improve service delivery and the university's system-wide risk profile. Next slide, please. With your permission, Mr. Chair, I now turn the remainder of this presentation to Mr. Kuffner.
Mr. Kuffner, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to share with the members of this committee the updates the IAM team has made over the past year for the audit findings outlined in Mr. Galswick's last slide. We've made progress on 10 of the 25 findings, with the majority of the findings being in the high risk category, which the updates in this presentation will focus on. For strategy, the timeline that we saw on the last slide presented by Mr. Glacek describes the high-level areas where work needs to occur to make progress on responding to the audit. To facilitate the discussions, decisions, and changes required to resolve these findings in the collaborative assessment, the IAM team has established an IAM governance committee as a decision-making body under the authority of the Executive Oversight of Compliance Committee. The IAM team has also adopted industry-leading strategies for planning and executing work across, with cross-functional teams. Finally, we continue to refine and develop our IAM roadmap, which we'll discuss in more detail later in the presentation. Regarding staffing, the IAM team has identified that 17 of the 25 audit findings are blocked due to challenges around team staffing. We have continued to fill all of our open positions, as well as continue to advocate for the resources we need to resolve these findings. While these challenges are being addressed, the team has adopted a Center of Excellence model to allow the university to begin to take advantage of technology capabilities that we have. In the category of system classification, the IAM team has been using new work execution strategies that introduce more transparency for our stakeholders in how we organize and prioritize our work. Additionally, we are demonstrating progress in resolving the high-risk findings identified in the IAM security gap analysis performed by Information Security. I'd like to discuss role and group management and access termination together. These two findings, they're related findings where the IAM team will need more resources to provide a brand new service to the university. As discussed in the team staffing board, there are challenges with getting the resources needed to accomplish that goal. But to help make progress while that challenge is addressed, we have decided to open up our technology using a Center of Excellence model launching on July 1st of this year. This will allow the areas of the university to use our new technologies and our new capabilities to manage their access in a guided self-service fashion. And finally, criteria for deprovisioning. The IAM team is working with stakeholders to address lingering access of terminated employees. Additionally, IAM has worked with the Provost Office and the Office of Human Resources to standardize the access policy for Emeriti, as well as define system and business process changes needed to allow for the consistent management of Emeriti access. Next slide, please. As we move forward, the IAM team will continue to strengthen its roadmap and evolve its strategy. As we uncover the detailed work needed to resolve the audit findings, we will continue to work with information security experts and other stakeholders to ensure the solutions proposed in the roadmap address the audit findings while respecting the business needs of our stakeholders. We will continue to partner with the Office of Internal Audit to ensure that our remediations address the intent of the findings. And finally, once we have a roadmap with work defined in collaboration with our stakeholders, we will use the results of that roadmap to drive decisions and actions needed to affect the changes across the university that will resolve these issues. Ultimately, the results of all of this work will not just be checking boxes that audit findings are resolved. It will be that the university sets an example that a collaborative identity and access management program with broad impact can be achieved, and that a mature IAM service is developed that improves the university's risk profile and security. Mr. Chair, members of the committee, this concludes our remarks, and we stand prepared for any questions.
Thank you very much. We'll turn to discussion. Again, please use the raise hand feature if you wish to speak or ask a question. And again, I will ask Maggie to assist me with identifying anybody who has signaled in. Do we have any speakers?
Mr. Chair, I do not see any raised hands yet. Actually, Regent Powell has raised his hand.
Regent Powell.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Rocha and presenters. Thank you for the presentation and the update. I guess the first question has to do with what I'm sort of concluding our resource questions related to this process. It sounds like we're going to need to build staff, and that's a number one priority, and I understand that. So you're in the process of doing that. I'd like to know, when you feel you'll have the right staff level, and then related to cost. It sounds like as part of this exercise, there will be either upgrades or replacement of some systems. And should we think of that as a natural replacement, within the kind of IT enterprise at the university, or will mitigating these risks require above and beyond spending? And I understand if that's the case, but I guess where the two pieces, staff and investment, lead me to is there sort of a budget that we can see at some point for what it's going to cost us to mitigate risk in this area? It sounds like it'll be significant, and so we should know that. And I understand it's important, but we should know it. And then the other question is, I appreciate that the pandemic slowed us down and was a barrier, and I understand that, but it does seem that this is a lengthy process, 2 to 4 years. And could you give us a feel for what the big time barriers are, given the high level of this risk? It just feels like one of the things that we ought to, we really want to try to knock these down and develop mitigation as soon as we can. And yet, we're going to have several more years of risk exposure, it sounds like. So those are the two questions.
Excellent questions. Thank you. And Vice President Galachik, would you like to triage the question or send it to the right source for a response?
Yes. Thank you, Chair Rocha, Regent Powell, members of the committee. All of those are fantastic questions, and I thank you for those. The budget for this particular project is one that includes technology-related resources, as well as a reprioritization of effort. And a lot of that is one time, because once the processes have been re-architected and the technologies have been stood up, then the team can go into operations, and that long-term budget will be adjusted to that new reality. The pandemic has created a situation where the order in which we had originally intended to sequence these events, Regent Powell, was one where we would approach some of these primary service level decisions and then process re-architecture before we acquired technologies and rationalized the technologies. And the reality is that the pandemic has created a situation where the Office of Human Resources, as well as student administration, have had to react to the conditions of the pandemic that all of you have discussed over time. And so what we've done is we've implemented technologies and acquired technologies as part of our ongoing budget that we know that we are going to need as part of this new program. So in answer to the question about a budget, resources, and the reallocation of those teams, it's a reprioritization, and most of the technologies that we need to acquire or stand up are already budgeted as part of the institution's technology budget.
Good, thank you.
Thank you. Regent
Follow
Powell?
on, Chair.
Yes, please.
Just a quick one. So I know next to nothing about IT, but nevertheless, I'm glad you decided to move ahead with the technology acquisition, which was the thing that you could do during the pandemic. I mean, I'm guessing that because this is a problem across many enterprises across the country, there's enough knowledge and wisdom out there about what we need, that you could do that with a very low level of risk. And I'm glad you moved ahead to start to acquire the technology. Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Powell. Further questions or comments from members of the committee? I've got Regent Sviggum.
Oh, Mr. Chairman, thank you. I was going to lower my hand because Regent Powell basically asked the question I was going to. So I apologize for not getting my hand lowered.
Well, it was nice to hear your voice on this fine Thursday morning. We'll turn to Regent Kenyanya. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Chair Rocha. Vice President Galacek, appreciate the presentation. Brief question. If I recall the slides correctly, there was one of the items in progress was access decommissioning. And I just wanted to clarify, when we say that's in progress, are we referring to the creation of a new process or acquiring the new technologies? Because if I'm understanding that correctly, I feel like that's one of, if not the highest risk item there, right? It's certainly an issue if existing employees or students have more access than they should, but I think it's even more of an issue if folks who shouldn't have any have access at all. So, I mean, am I reading that to understand that we're still not decommissioning folks who leave the university at a proper time, or are we still doing that in a manual way? But the in progress refers to the end state system.
Thank you, Regent Kenyanya. Vice President Galacek.
Thank you, Chair Rocha, Regent Kenyanya, members of the committee. That's a great question. And I think that there are multiple answers to that question. I would like to turn that question over to my colleague, Mr. Kuffner, to answer some of the details related to your question.
Thank you, Mr. Galacek. Mr. Kenyanya, what we have right now is that we do have the technology in place with some fundamental pieces of automation based around data. What we are missing at this point to really scale this out and make it a viable, broad service for access termination for the entire university would be the resource staffing issue. There are apps that come and go, and necessarily behind that, there's access that must come and go. So right now we would have enough people to perhaps keep up with the churn, the day-to-day churn, but there are 800 to 1,000 applications waiting to be onboarded. And so we need to get through that. And that's the piece that, that's where the university is at today.
Regent Kenyanya.
No follow-up. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Further questions or comments from members of the committee? And one thing that I always like to put out there is that if a question comes in late to your consciousness, we can always ask these questions after, outside of the committee meeting as well, and ensure that that information gets out to everybody. Because I know sometimes I'm coming up with a thought or a question after we've already concluded the item. Seeing no further questions, we'll move on then to item number 3. This is the update on the University Ethics Program for discussion. It's an overview of the university's conflict of interest program. I'd like to welcome our presenters. We have Chief Compliance Officer Boyd Coomer, John Gooden, Associate Director for the Conflict of Interest Program, and Professor Art Erdman, who serves as the chair of the Institutional Conflict Review Panel and co-chair of the Individual Conflict Review Panel. Presenters, please begin when you're ready.
Thank you, Chair Rocha and Regents of the Board. So it's my pleasure to be here today in order to provide you with updates from the Office of Institutional Compliance. Please note that provided in your board packet is a written report with information related to the compliance reviews that have been completed since I last came before you, as well as a summary of U-Report statistics for the second half of 2020. If you have any questions related to this report, please don't hesitate to contact me. Today, as Regent Rocha told you, I'm joined by two colleagues, John Gooden, who is the Associate Director for the university's Conflict of Interest Program, and Dr. Art Erdman, who's the Director for the Earl E. Bakken Medical Devices Center, and also is the Chair for the Institutional Conflict Review Panel and Co-Chair for the Individual Conflict Review Panel. Note, Dr. Erdman has been involved with the university's Conflict of Interest Program since 1998. So he brings with him to every meeting a wealth of experience and historical context for the matters that we're discussing. Next slide, please. All right, so I'm told that we have about 25 minutes for our presentation, so I'm going to keep the opening comments brief. Our goal is to provide the Audit and Compliance Committee with an overview of the university's individual and institutional conflict of interest program. We plan to have 10 or more minutes left at the end of the slides. So we do welcome your questions, and if possible, we'd like to hold those to the end of the presentation, unless there's just something that you feel needs to be immediately clarified. And with that, I'm going to hand the presentation over to my colleague, John Gooden.
Mr. Gooden, please.
Morning, Chair Rocha, committee members. Next slide, please. Our conflict of interest program mission is to timely identify and manage both individual and institutional conflicts of interest. There are other conflicts of interest that could be created outside of the financial arena, and we have two separate Board of Regents and administrative policies that address those. The outside consulting and other commitments policy, which is owned by the Executive Vice President and Provost, and also the nepotism and personal relationships policy that is owned by the Director of EOAA. I will mention that if in the course of managing an individual financial conflict of interest, we see issues relating to those two policies, we will address those within our conflict management plans. Next slide, please. First, we'll take a look at where most of our work is done in the program, and that's on individual conflicts of interest. And those conflicts can be created when a faculty or staff member has a significant financial interest, which is a term of art, or a business interest in a business entity that relates somehow to their university responsibilities. And we cover conflicts in all areas of university responsibilities. In some institutions of higher education, their focus is on research conflicts only, but we'll address conflicts in teaching and clinical healthcare and administrative functions as well. An example in clinical healthcare for any of our physicians or dentists or veterinarians who may have a significant financial interest in a business entity that provides products that they might prescribe, then we would address that particular conflict. A great deal of our focus is on research conflicts. And so that could be created as an example. Many of our faculty do consulting work on the outside, and if they conduct research that's sponsored by the company with which they consult, then that would be a conflict that we would have to manage. And also point out that significant financial interest or business interest also includes those of family members, so a spouse, a domestic partner, or a dependent. Next slide, please. These are the significant financial interest thresholds that we use in our program. The federal government does not have one standard policy for conflicts of interest. So we use the Public Health Service standards. Those regulations were published in 2011. It's a lower threshold. So we apply this to those individuals in the university that are engaged in clinical healthcare or do research that's sponsored by the public health services. And the big one there is the National Institutes of Health. Everyone else in the university, their significant financial interest threshold is based on the National Science Foundation conflict of interest standards. Next slide. In addition to the significant financial interest that could create a conflict, we also look at business interest. It's unusual that an individual would have a business interest without a significant financial interest, but it can happen, especially when you're dealing with service on a board of a nonprofit that may have some interaction with the university. So we don't require that you be compensated in order to use a business interest as a foundation for a conflict. Next slide, please. Our process starts with our centralized program finding out that there are financial or business interests that are related to one's university responsibilities, and our primary reporting document that's required annually is the Report of External Professional Activities, or REPA. On the REPA, 11,000 employees across the university file this, and they report their outside activities as well as significant financial interest and business interests that relate to their university responsibilities. We add people throughout the year. We have a process working with our IT partners to be able to identify new employees who have to file the REPA. And so it is a continuous process update throughout the year. For our university officials, as identified in the Board of Regents conflict of interest policy and as augmented through our administrative policy, we have about 90 annual filers of the financial disclosure for university officials. These individuals file both the REPA and what we call the FDUO. And it asks for a little bit different information than what the REPA asks for. It asks for sources of income of more than $10,000 for the individual filer or their family. It asks whether they own property in the state of Minnesota outside of their main home, and any ownership of securities, and also affiliations. So it serves a little bit different purpose, and it's a little broader disclosure than the Report of External Professional Activities. And aside from the documents that we have for reporting, we also rely on our teammates throughout the university to contact us if a conflict of interest comes up. We have a great relationship with Tech Commercialization, the Institutional Review Board, and sponsored projects. And we also, since all three of us on the conflict of interest program have been with the university for about 10 years, people know us. So we get lots of referrals, and we always welcome emails and phone calls from faculty and staff. We'd like to find out in advance of them taking on a new financial interest or business interest. And we'd like to have that discussion with them so we could talk through the implications of taking on that new interest. Next slide, please. Once we get the reports in, then myself and my colleague Seth Beckert will look at the report and identify those matters that require conflict panel review. And we use a two-step process. 8 to 10 times a year, we'll organize a panel, and the executive conflict review panel functions as kind of a triage entity. We meet with the executive conflict review panel. We provide them with the agenda. We have discussions. In difficult cases, we may invite the faculty or staff member to join us at that meeting. And it's at that point that we figure out what facts do we need to add in order to make recommendations to the full conflict review panel that typically meets 2 weeks later. The conflict review panel is the entity that makes final conflict of interest determinations, and approves conflict management plans. And you can see that we have folks from throughout the university that participate as non-voting members in addition to the 10 faculty and 1 external voting member on that panel. So they will make the conflict of interest determination. They will approve any conflict management plan. Next slide, please. Then it is turned over to myself and my colleague Seth. We draft the management plans and send them out to the prospective plan holder for review and acceptance. When we finalize the plan, we'll send it to the plan holder, and any individuals who need to know about that conflict of interest in order to help ensure the management of the conflict typically involves a department head, may go to the research dean for the college, sponsored projects administration if it requires notification to a federal agency, and the institutional review board if the conflict involves human participant research. After we get the plan in place, our office does a 90-day compliance review where we contact the plan holder to make sure that they have moved out on anything that required immediate action. Typically, that would be making sure you've made disclosures, for example, in a research conflict scenario. You've made those written disclosures to those who are involved with you on the research. And then we do annual reviews of all of our conflict management plans where we will follow up with the plan holder. And if there's any oversight mechanism in the plan, that typically occurs at the annual review mark, and we'll ask that oversight review be conducted. We retire the plans when they're no longer required. We have somewhere in the neighborhood of 195 individual conflict management plans university-wide presently. Next slide, please. These are the typical mechanisms that we'll put in a management plan. If it's a simple conflict, the individual may only have 2 or 3 mechanisms in a plan. And the overall purpose of the plan is to make sure we protect research participants if the conflict involves human participant research. We always want to protect objectivity of university work and promote transparency. It's important that those with a need to know of the individual's conflict. So disclosures of interest, we usually have 2 or 3 disclosure mechanisms in the plans. If it is a conflict involving human participant research, we may limit that conflicted individual's role in the research. And in certain cases, we may require research oversight by a research dean or department head. Typically, when we have faculty that are involved in startups, where the startups may get grants, the companies get grants with subawards to the university to do some work in that conflicted individuals lab, then we want to establish oversight in that case. And what we do in those cases as well is we require the conflicted individual to provide an annual update of what's going on with the company as well as what's going on in the university, so that there can be a good discussion and transparency of any additional conflicts. Next slide, please. We are able to manage most conflicts, but the longstanding limitation that we've had in our program is that if you do have a conflict, you cannot serve as a principal investigator for a human participant study involving more than minimal risk as determined by the Institutional Review Board. We also added a provision in 2018 that if you are an investigator at any level, be it a principal investigator or co-investigator, that if you're on a human participant study, you cannot simultaneously earn speaking or consulting income from the company sponsor, or if that human participant study involves development or evaluation of the company's technology. Next slide, please. Now we'll move to the institutional conflict of interest arm of our responsibilities. We have maybe 2 to 3 meetings a year to handle institutional conflicts. This is the definition from the Board of Regents policy. Next slide. Due to the significant gravity of an institutional conflict, the membership on our panel includes Dr. Erdman as the chair of the panel. Also, the other co-chair of our individual panel serves on the institutional panel. We have internal auditor Klatt, Mike Volnez on the panel, Boyd Coomer, and we have a community member who is a former regent and a retired physician from the Mayo serving on this panel. The majority of our work over the past 4 to 5 years has involved clinical trials involving university licensed intellectual property. And our starting point under our policy is a presumption that these trials will not be conducted at the university unless the institutional panel, considering a variety of factors, makes a determination that the human participants can be protected, that it can be done objectively, that a management plan could be put together. And in all of these cases, we require that the investigators individually be unconflicted. And we also require semi-annual reviews by the Vice Dean for Research of these particular clinical trials. We've approved, I think, now 16 phase 1 clinical trials to be conducted pursuant to conflict management plans. Next slide, please. At the institutional panel, we also handle the individual conflicts of university officials. We have one current plan involving a dean, but we haven't had a lot of responsibility to have to do institutional conflict management plans for the university officials. We also annually do a review of information from purchasing, from the foundation, sponsored projects, and tech commercialization. We get information that deals with business entities who have received contracts over the $50,000 threshold and provided gifts and sponsored research at the university. And we identify those companies that appear in 2 or more categories. And kind of my main focus is looking where there are sole source contracts and working with purchasing services to see the justification for those sole source contracts. The idea being we don't want companies to get contracts based on what they may provide through the foundation. And these issues are really dealt with through good practices from the various departments involved, but that is our annual check that we conduct. Next slide, please. Under the institutional conflict of interest policy, the board does reserve authority to review and approve management plans in these particular areas. The one that sticks out is if there's a potential conflict of the president, we are required to provide that to the board to consider and approve before a plan is approved. And then we provide an annual report to the board on all institutional conflict of interest matters that don't fall under those categories. And we've done that for years, is provide you with the information about the rebuttable presumption clinical trial management plans, our annual review, and also the reporting status of the financial disclosures for university officials. Next slide, please. And Chair Rocha and committee members, we stand ready to address any questions you may have.
Thank you very much for that, that thorough report. I'll now turn it out to our colleagues here. I've got Regent Davenport.
Thank you, Regent Rocha. I have a question, or rather a quick point of clarification for Dr. Gooden. If a question of conflict has been raised by a third party, and it sounds like the outcome of that investigation is public rather than private, so that that third party learns what the investigation entailed and what other outcomes or actions are required. Is that correct?
Director Gooden.
Chair Rocha, Regent Davenport, I guess I'm having difficulty understanding the question.
Chair Rocha.
Please.
So in other areas like equity, for example, if someone reports discrimination or some kind of conflict by another party, they may never hear what the outcome of an investigation is, because it would be something that's considered private data. So in this conflict of interest arena, somebody who makes a report would know, yes, there was a conflict, no, there wasn't a conflict. If yes, then here were the remedies.
Dr. Gooden.
May I, John? Chair Regent Davenport. So when our office, one mechanism for our office to receive concerns that there is a potential unaddressed conflict of interest is through the U-Report system. So a reporter would make a report through the U-Report system. And there is, you may have seen or been here for the presentation I recently gave on the U-Report process. And that process would involve engagement from the compliance program with the conflict of interest program to look into that potential conflict of interest. Feedback would be left for the reporter, but it would be limited, like we limit most feedback. But those U-Reports are potentially public records that are accessible through a DPA request. So, but we wouldn't necessarily give the details of the result. Now, the individual, if it was, say, an allegation that there was an individual conflict of interest, and if we reviewed it and we found that there was an individual who had a conflict of interest, our program would follow up with that individual to make sure that we took the appropriate steps to mitigate that conflict of interest.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. All right, we'll proceed then to Regent Sviggum.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Dr. Gooden, in understanding the process, I think their conflict of interest process is one that kind of prevents conflicts from happening, or at the very least provides a mitigation plan if there is a potential conflict there, rather than after the fact trying to violations. That's correct. Would that be true? What I missed was, and maybe I missed it there someplace, out of the 11,000 disclosure reports that you talked about, I'm going to assume that 10,999 people are honest, upright, fair, open in their disclosure. I'm going to assume that there's one bad apple out of 11,000. That's probably an assumption I shouldn't make, but do we have any type of, did I miss this, reporting from the outside as potential conflicts? Say, like if you were in the environment, you would call it turn-in poachers, right? Or if you were driving on the road, you would call the sheriff, or you would call the state patrol if you saw a drunk driver. Do you get a lot of reports, or are there any reports that come to you from potential violations of persons that don't disclose, that are kind of the turn-in poacher type thing?
Director Gooden.
Chair Rocha, Regent Sviggum. So two questions there. The first one, I think you made the comment about preventing conflicts. And that's true as it relates to purchasing conflicts of interest that are regulated by state statute. We want to make sure on the front end, through our training, both our training and purchasing, that we avoid purchasing conflicts, because once a purchasing conflict situation occurs and gets reported, it's too late to unring the bell. But in most cases, I mean, we encourage conflicts as long as we can manage them because we want our faculty to be entrepreneurial. And there's been significant movements ahead. And I think Dr. Erdman can speak to that. The second point is, do we have the ability to check other sources to see if we're getting accurate reporting from our faculty and staff? The one area that we do review annually is for Medicare and Medicaid have the open payments for physicians. So physicians that receive payments of any type from a medical device or pharmaceutical company, that's out there on the open payment system. And so we check for our physicians every year to see what's reported in open payments and compare it to what's been reported on the REPA. And we work through those situations. We may have some minor issues as we go through that. We figure out how to address those situations. If a management plan is necessary, we put those in place, and we put a compilation report together to send typically to Dean Tolar at the medical school if it involves just physicians at the medical school.
Regent Sviggum?
I think that answers my question, Dr. Gooden. I think it does, but suppose, and I don't know that this takes place or not, but you talked about financial conflicts. You also talked about travel conflicts a little bit. So suppose that you can't know everything about everybody. There is no way. You just can't. So do you have a hotline that suppose someone in the university employees had this exclusive, expensive trip to Kenyon, Minnesota for a week that was very significant. Do you have and they don't report it, they don't disclose it. Is there a hotline that I can call that I know that this trip to Kenyon took place and shouldn't have taken place?
Director Gooden.
Chair Rocha, Regent Sviggum, yes, through our U-report system, though those reports could come in that way. We would also, welcome reports directly to our office. And if we saw Kenyon, Minnesota, that would be the red flag. If we jump all over that one.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Regent Sviggum. Regent Verhalen.
Thank you, Chair Rocha. And I'd like to initially send this to Director Gooden, and perhaps it needs to go to someone else, but I will leave that to your and his determination. It seems like, especially in dealing, or specifically in dealing with human participant research, that the determination of minimal risk is a real key issue as far as how that is handled through the conflict of interest process. And can you walk me through in a little bit more detail, not to use up all of our time, but in a little bit more detail, what checks are in place throughout that process after that minimal risk determination is made to verify that that study continues to qualify as minimal risk? And then what are off-ramping opportunities, or are there off-ramping opportunities along the way should a determination be made after the study has started that that minimal risk determination may no longer apply?
Dr. Gooden.
Chair Rocha, Regent Verhalen, we work very closely with Institutional Review Board. Their process for IRB protocols includes a question of conflict of interest in there. And I'm not aware of situations where a study has gone from less than minimal risk to more than minimal risk. I think the IRB typically, if it's close, I would think that they would go greater than minimal risk. I mean, there have been instances where one of us has to go first, and typically it's our conflict review comes before the Institutional Review Board finally approves a protocol. So I would expect that somebody on the staff there might check in with us if they're aware of a conflict of interest. I feel pretty good about our relationship with the IRB and them staying on top of conflict of interest issues. If we had a management plan in place and we made it clear that they could participate as a conflicted investigator in less than minimal risk, then it would kind of be incumbent upon that investigator, if there was a change to the risk level, to let us know.
Regent Verhalen.
Thank you, Chair Rocha and Director Gooden. I have no follow-up to that.
All right, thank you. Regent Powell.
Well, thank you, Chair Rocha, and thank you, Dr. Gooden, for the presentation and the diligence. It's really important work. And my question sort of hinges on the notion that our research enterprise is growing. The corporate privately funded part of it is growing really fast, and so so it's more important than ever. And so my question has to do with sort of what mechanisms do you have and what steps do you take just to continuously improve the process? It really is important. And I just want to make sure that we're sort of pressure testing, getting third-party looks at our own process, and that we're, that there's a part of what we do is devoted to making sure that we're kind of staying ahead and continuously improving. I appreciate your comments on that topic.
Director Gruden.
Chair Rocha, Regent Powell. Yes, we do comprehensive reviews of our policies, and we try to pay attention to what's going on throughout the university to see if there's emerging risks that we need to address if our policies and procedures aren't capturing those. I know that this might be something with Dr. Erdman at the Medical Device Center, who's been doing this for quite some time and deals with industry extensively. Art, if you have anything that you might be able to add in this area.
Regent Powell.
Maybe we're waiting to hear from Dr. Erdman.
Oh, I'm sorry, Dr. Erdman.
Yeah.
Chair Rocha, Regent Powell. Yes, indeed, there is an increase in activity with industry. My particular center, for example, is concentrating on medical devices, and we're in the middle of 900 companies in that ecosystem. And it's pretty exciting as a faculty member in this area to collaborate with this industry and keep it going and provide an industry that's rich for our students, which we educate, and also do research that provides basis, both basic research and applied research for working with industry. I think as partial answer to your question, we work very closely with OVPR, the Venture Center, and the Tech Transfer Office. And often they're in our committee meetings. In fact, whenever we're dealing with a faculty member that might have a startup company or have other relationships with these companies. In our center alone, I think over the years we've had 16 startup companies, very, very exciting. And if you've watched over the years, as I have, the Venture Center has gone from, in the early days, 1 or 2 startups a year, and we're about 18, 19 about every year. So they're doing a great job. We also keep track of other universities and their policies as well, and try to be ahead of the curve, because a lot of the new faculty members we hire have this spirit of creativity and entrepreneurship, and we want to be able to attract the best of the best there too. So perhaps that helps a little bit.
It does. It does. I'm good, Chair Rocha. Thank you.
Thank you. Chief Auditor Klatt.
So I intended to ask this question before Regent Powell asked his, but I also want to engage Dr. Erdman. He and I have been involved in conflict of interest since the ink dried on the policies back all those many years ago. And he's provided just tremendous leadership. I engage in the institutional conflict, not the individual. But I'd just like him to share with the committee his view from that leadership position on conflict of interest and institutional conflict of interest. Again, we want our faculty to be entrepreneurial, but we also want to have appropriate checks and balances over the appropriateness of those relationships. And the conflict of interest panels are where that happens. And so, Art, would you just talk about, your role in that, and that Art just does a great job of making faculty feel comfortable going through that process, but making sure that all the right questions are asked and the answers are provided. So Art, your personal kind of viewpoints on that?
Professor Erdman.
Yes, Chair and Gail. First of all, Gail, we're going to miss you big time. And pre-congratulations. Hopefully there'll be lots of other opportunities. Indeed, there's been tremendous change over the years I've been involved with conflict of interest. We were very, very conservative back in the day when the ink was drying. But at the same time, and it's great to have the history as we have cases come both before the individual conflict and the institutional conflict committee. It's nice to have that balance of understanding what we've done before and where the trends are going. We also are seeing the academic health center or medical school engage more and more in clinical trials, and my particular unit, which is in the College of Science and Engineering, is working more and more closely with the academic health units and creating hopefully new solutions to healthcare that all of us and our loved ones can take advantage of. I think that Gail would agree with me that it's a balance every time that we think about very carefully. What's the risk level for the individual, for a patient, for the university? We always have in mind of not wanting to be on the front page of the Star Tribune. At the same time, we want to be able to, particularly in the healthcare area, be on the cutting edge, which I think the university is. I think you would see that over the years, we're pretty proud of what comes on in the Tribune of response to COVID, the COVentor, which my team was part of, for example. So it's always a careful balance, and we certainly look forward to having good advice by administration, by the conflict of interest group and the Board of Regents on where we should be basing our decisions. So hopefully that at least answers a little bit of what you had in mind, and thank you very much for the opportunity to provide that perspective.
Thank you. Chief Auditor Klatt, follow up.
No follow-up on that, but I'd also just like to point out to the committee that Regent Emeriti Brian Neal also serves on the Institutional Conflict of Review Committee and has for many years, and has on many occasions offered great insight and perspective that have made us kind of take a step back and think through issues in a different way. So your esteemed group has played an active role in this as well.
Thank you. And I had the pleasure of serving 4 years on this board with Dr. Neal, and I always enjoy getting to see him at dinners at East Cliff when the world is allowing such things. So thank you very much for that. I don't see any other hands up. Seeing none, I just had a couple questions. We're up against our time here on our schedule, but so I'm not going to seek a response, but couple of the questions that I have is, when we talk about conflict, and I guess Mr. Gooden, Director Gooden, if you do have a quick response to this one, it's kind of the overseeing the overseers. If the question arises that, we have deans, for instance, that oversee research, and we have these panels, do we have a mechanism for, ensuring that those panels are in the objective form, or the leaders that are making these kinds of decisions? I know you can keep following that line up to the board itself as to where conflicts arise, or may exist. But do we have a process for ensuring that the overseers are also overseen with respect to conflicts?
Chair Rocha, yes, when we build in oversight into our management plans, it's a given that the individual providing oversight themselves have to be unconflicted. So that's kind of built in. As to just responsibilities of department heads or deans overall, I mean, we've had discussions with a few folks over the years in advance of them considering pursuing a particular outside interest, and as part of the calculus there, we talk through, would this compromise your ability to fulfill your responsibilities, as a department head? So we do factor that in, Chair Rocha.
Thank you. And then the last point, and maybe at some point in the future, kind of a comparative analysis would be available to the committee. But the conversation that just occurred between Professor Erdman and Chief Auditor Klatt about the enormous value of the experience and the perspective that comes in on the panels is essential to the university's success in this area. One of the things that, as long as I've been doing this thing, trying to understand or to fully understand is kind of the difference between the way we have researchers on in the university's sphere on our payroll, so to speak, and versus how a private enterprise or a private corporation that retains researchers does the same thing. It seems that we have a much more engaged staff of researchers, both in terms of who they interact with, but also in who owns the ultimate result of the research that's funded by the university. This is a bit of a tip of the hat to Regent Simonson, who is always concerned about our ability to actually gain revenue from those things that have been invested in by the state of Minnesota, or the University of Minnesota, and those that provide funding to it. So I don't know that we have time for it here, but that's something that I would love to have a better understanding of how we compare. I understand, Professor Erdman, you made a very good point about we watch other institutions, other universities, to make sure we're in the right place, and perhaps even ahead of the game on how we do these things for attracting folks. There are obviously some risks that come with some of those changes as well. So so I don't know. I guess I'll leave it at that. But thank you all very much for your participation today. And obviously, people can again follow up with questions as well, even after the committee meeting. So I'm going to move on. Our final item today is the information items. Chief Auditor Klatt, do you have any comments on the information before us?
No, it's written in your docket on page 39. The General Counsel's Office was active in engaging external audit resources this reporting period, both under 100,000. One to look at getting some tax guidance around the employment of international students, which became an issue during the pandemic, And the second was to do some work, continue the work in the human resource function, which was included in Sue Paulson's report earlier. And then the second information item is the semi-annual Chief Compliance Officer report that provides information about the compliance risk reviews that office has undertaken, as well as the statistics on the U report, our confidential reporting line. And both Sue Paulson and Boyd Coomer are here if you have any questions about either one of those items.
Thank you very much. Do any members of the committee have questions or comments related to these items? Going once? I don't see any. Well, that brings us to the end of our agenda today. Before we adjourn, I remind everyone that we have a very short break now in Finance and Operations. Committee will begin meeting promptly at 9:30 a.m. There being no other business before the committee, we stand adjourned.